All right, you know that feeling, right? You're doing your weekly shop, pushing the trolley around, and despite all the headlines saying inflation's finally slowing down, your food bill still feels stubbornly, well, frustratingly high. It's not just a feeling, is it? It's a very real challenge hitting households right across the UK now.
It absolutely is, and that's precisely what we want to dig into today. We need to unpack why UK food prices are still climbing, even when general inflation seems to be easing elsewhere.
Yeah.
We're going to explore the underlying reasons, look at exactly where our food actually comes from, and also touch on solutions being discussed government level, but also what households are trying to do.
Okay, so let's just get straight to it then, because the numbers, they just don't seem to quite add up, do they? I mean, as of mid-2024, overall UK inflation is actually under 3%,
Yeah.
which, sounds pretty okay on its own.
Yeah, manageable.
But then you look at food inflation, and it's still hovering around, what, 7 to 9% year on year. That's a massive gap. And it means UK food prices are rising faster than in most of Europe right now. So maybe just a quick refresher for anyone listening. What is inflation, basically?
Yeah, good starting point. At its simplest, inflation just means prices are generally rising over time. We measure it as a percentage change in the cost of a fixed basket of goods.
Right, that basket.
Exactly. Think of it like a standard shopping list: bread, milk, petrol, clothes, stuff the average person buys. Economists track the total cost of that basket. And central banks, like the Bank of England here, they usually aim for about 2% inflation. That's seen as the sweet spot.
Why 2%?
Well, too much inflation. Obviously, people can't afford the basics. Life gets very expensive very quickly. But too little inflation or even deflation, prices falling, that can actually signal economic stagnation. Businesses don't invest, people delay spending. It's not good either.
And we've seen some real ups and downs historically, haven't we? I mean, after World War II, high inflation.
Definitely. Post-war Reconstruction pushed prices up. Then the 1970s brought that really tricky stagflation. Remember that? High inflation and high unemployment.
Yeah, driven by oil shocks, union wage demands. A really tough time.
A very tough period. But then things calmed down a bit in the 90s and 2000s. A lot of that stability was credited to the Bank of England becoming independent in 1997, focusing purely on inflation targets.
Right, so inflation was mostly under control then. And after the 2008 financial crash, it was actually pretty low for a while.
It was, yeah, sometimes even below that 2% target.
Until the last few years, that is.
Yeah.
Because 2021 to 2023, wow, that felt like a massive global spike.
It really did. You had the supply chain chaos from COVID, right? Everything got gummed up.
Yeah, definitely.
Then huge amounts of government spending worldwide to support economies during lockdowns. And then, of course, the war in Ukraine hitting energy and food supplies globally. It was like a perfect storm.
Absolutely, a perfect storm.
And that leads us to where we are now, this sort of UK anomaly. While most other major economies, the US, the Eurozone, are seeing their overall inflation slow right down.
Yeah.
The UK's food inflation is still sticking out like a sore thumb. It remains stubbornly high.
So that's the key question then. Why? Why is food such a special, difficult case here in the UK compared to other things or other countries? What's going on underneath it all?
Well, I think what's really eye-opening, and maybe something people don't always realize day to day, is just how much of our food starts its journey far away. The core problem is the UK's incredibly import-heavy food system.
Import heavy. How much are we talking?
We import about 46% of the food we consume.
Nearly half.
46%, wow.
Yeah. And for some things, it's even higher. Think about fresh fruit. Almost all of it is imported. Around 3/4 of our tomatoes come from abroad. Nearly 80% of the cheese we eat.
Gosh, okay, so we're massively reliant on bringing food in.
Hugely reliant.
Yeah.
And that makes the system vulnerable.
So what happens when you throw a spanner in the works of a system that's already so dependent on imports, like, say, Brexit?
Well, that's exactly it. Brexit has introduced significant structural changes since 2020. We're talking about new customs checks, a lot more red tape, delays at the border.
Exactly, frictions. And these aren't just temporary issues that'll smooth out over time. They are permanent cost increases that are now essentially baked into the price of importing food.
So it's not like a one-off shock. It's more like a new, higher baseline cost for bringing food in.
Precisely. That's
Yeah.
a good way to put it, a higher baseline.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about the people involved? The labor? People actually growing and picking the food here? How's that been affected?
That's another absolutely crucial piece of the puzzle. The UK farming sector traditionally relied very heavily on seasonal workers coming over from the EU.
Yeah, you hear about that a lot.
Well, post-Brexit immigration rules have significantly reduced that pool of labor. Farmers are struggling to find enough people. And the direct result, you get reports of crops being wasted in fields because there aren't enough hands to harvest them.
Oh, really? Wasted crops.
Yes, which means lower domestic supply, and inevitably that pushes up the price for what does get picked and makes it to the shops.
So we've got import issues, labor issues. But it's not just UK-specific factors, is it? We're connected to global events, too.
Completely. Global weather patterns and increasingly climate shocks are having a direct impact right here on our supermarket shelves. Think about the droughts we saw in Spain recently that affects the supply and price of fruit and vegetables the UK heavily imports.
Like salads and tomatoes and things.
Exactly. Or remember the floods in Pakistan? That impacts rice supplies globally. Heat waves in India affecting certain crops. These events directly influence the availability and cost of foods the UK relies on. It really shows how interconnected everything is.
And the pound. We always hear about the value of the pound affecting import prices.
Mm.
How big a factor is that? Is it just a small ripple, or is it really adding to the problem?
No, it's definitely a foundational problem, not just a ripple. The UK pays for all these imports in foreign currencies, euros, dollars, whatever it might be. So when the pound is weaker, especially as it has been post-Brexit compared to previous levels, those imports just become significantly more expensive when you convert the cost back into sterling.
Right, so everything just costs more to buy from abroad.
Exactly. It adds another layer of cost pressure that ultimately filters down to the price you pay at the till.
And it's quite a stark contrast when you look at, say, France or Germany, isn't it? They're still in the EU single market. Fewer of those border frictions we talked about.
Precisely. They can move food around much more easily within the bloc with fewer barriers, and that generally translates to slower food price rises or even prices stabilizing in some cases there. It really throws the UK's specific challenges into sharp relief.
Okay, so let's drill down a bit more into that import dependency you mentioned. Nearly half our food from outside the UK. Where is it actually coming from? Can you give us a rough breakdown? It helps paint a picture.
Sure. It's a truly global shopping basket. The biggest single source is still the EU. Roughly, let's say 25 to 30% of our food imports come from EU countries. Places like the Netherlands, Spain, France, Ireland are major suppliers.
And what kind of stuff are we getting from them?
A huge range. Lots of fresh fruit and vegetables, dairy products, meat, bakery items. Everyday staples, really. They're our closest and largest source.
Okay, so our neighbors provide the biggest slice. Where else? Further afield.
Oh, yes, much further afield. About 10% comes from Africa, countries like Kenya, South Africa. That's where a lot of our tea and coffee comes from, exotic fruits like mangoes and pineapples. Some vegetables like green beans, too.
Right. And Asia?
Asia contributes around 8%. Think India, China, Thailand. That covers things like rice, spices, noodles, sauces, quite a variety.
What about the Americas? North and South?
Yep, they're in the mix too. North America, the US and Canada provides about 5%, often processed foods, grains, some meat. And South America, also around 5%, things like sugar, beef, and fruits like bananas, often from Ecuador or Colombia. So it really does span the globe.
It's an incredibly complex web, isn't it? And these recent shocks we've discussed, Brexit, the war in Ukraine, they must have just piled pressure onto this already complicated system.
They absolutely have. They've made an intricate system much more precarious. Take the war in Ukraine. Ukraine was a massive global exporter of wheat and sunflower oil. The disruption there sent shockwaves through global food prices.
Yeah, I remember cooking oil prices soaring.
Exactly. And on top of that, you had the huge surge in energy prices, especially after 2022. That increases the cost of everything in the food chain: transport, refrigeration, processing, farming itself. It doesn't matter where the food comes from, higher energy costs hit it.
And you mentioned climate change affecting harvests abroad. It affects UK farming too, presumably.
It does. Unpredictable weather patterns here, droughts, floods add to the pressure on domestic production as well. And another factor is a rise in sort of global protectionism. During crises, some countries restrict their own food exports to protect their domestic supply.
Oh, right. So they hold on to their own stocks.
Yeah. Which further limits global availability and can push prices up for importing countries like the UK. So really, the bottom line is the UK is trying to import food from a global system that's already disrupted, more expensive, and less predictable than it used to be. And then our own specific policy choices, particularly around Brexit, are making it even harder and more costly to do so.
It really sounds like a multi-layered challenge, and
Yeah.
clearly not one that's going to disappear overnight. So what about solutions? What can actually be done? Let's maybe look at it from two angles. The big picture, government level stuff, and then maybe what individuals can do.
Okay. Well, at the government level, a key focus has to be boosting domestic production, making ourselves a bit less reliant on those imports. That could mean investing more in things like greenhouse technology, allowing us to grow more fruit and veg here year-round. Means properly incentivizing local farming, maybe through subsidies or grants for innovation, and critically, addressing those labor shortages we talked about, perhaps finding ways to bring in needed farm workers, maybe through targeted migration schemes. It's about building resilience
Yeah.
at home.
Building resilience at home. Yeah, that makes sense. And what about smoothing out those post-Brexit frictions you mentioned earlier? Can anything be done there?
That's the other really big area. It involves potentially negotiating smarter trade arrangements with the EU, or maybe aligning UK food safety standards more closely with the EU's what's called SPS standards.
Why would that help?
Because diverging standards create the need for more checks and paperwork at the border. Alignment could significantly reduce those delays and streamline the process, lowering costs. It's obviously politically complex, but the potential economic upside in terms of lower food import costs is pretty clear.
Okay. And thinking longer term about future shocks.
Yeah, building broader resilience is key. That could mean diversifying where we import from so we're not too reliant on any one region, especially those vulnerable to climate change, and maybe even creating strategic food reserves, similar to how countries hold oil reserves, to provide a buffer against sudden supply disruption.
Oh, right, like a national pantry, almost.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the government policy side. Now let's bring it down to the household level, because this is where it really bites for people listening.
Wow.
We know the average UK salary is around £34,000 a year. Take-home pay is roughly £2,200 a month, give or take. And food prices are just eating into that budget so quickly.
They really are. If you look at average monthly food spending, a single adult on that average income might be spending, say, £250 to £350 a month. That's already 12 to 16% of their take-home pay.
Okay, and for a family.
For a family of four, it's much higher, easily £700 to £1,000 a month on groceries. That can be anywhere from 20 to 30% of the average household income just vanishing on food.
Wow, 20 to 30%. And for lower-income families, it must be even more severe. That sounds absolutely devastating.
It is devastating. Take a family on a lower income, maybe around £24,000 a year. If they're spending £600 a month on food, which is quite possible, that's 30 to 35% of their entire income gone just on groceries. For people relying on benefits or earning the minimum wage, which is about £11.44 an hour now, this level of food inflation isn't just an inconvenience. It's a direct threat to their ability to afford basic necessities.
It's a huge struggle. So knowing all that, what can people actually do on an individual household level to try and manage these costs? Are there practical strategies?
There definitely are things people are doing, often out of necessity. Batch cooking and freezing meals is a big one. It reduces waste and can make ingredients go further. Buying frozen or canned fruit and veg instead of fresh can often be cheaper, and they last much longer, obviously.
Yeah, good point.
Using local markets, if you have access to them, can sometimes offer better value, especially for seasonal produce. And people are increasingly using supermarket loyalty apps, actively shopping at discount chains like Lidl and Aldi.
Right, the discounters have grown massively.
They have. And exploring food sharing networks, apps like Olio, where neighbors share surplus food. Oh, and switching to supermarket-owned brands, that can make a huge difference, often 30 to 50% cheaper than the big-name brands, and the quality is usually very comparable.
Those are all really practical tips, and I'm sure many listeners are already doing a lot of that or thinking about it. But there's a really crucial point here, isn't there? It goes beyond just being a savvy shopper.
There absolutely is, and it's important to stress this. While all those individual strategies are helpful and, frankly, essential for many families right now, there's a limit. There's only so much an individual household can do when these massive structural forces, import costs, labor shortages, global shocks, are pushing prices up across the board. This isn't just a personal budgeting problem or about people not shopping smart enough. It's fundamentally a system problem, and system problems ultimately require systemic solutions like the ones we discussed at the government level.
That's a really important distinction. It's not just on individuals to fix this. And maybe to really hammer that point home, let's quickly compare the UK's situation with other countries right now using that 2024 data.
Right.
Because the difference is quite stark, isn't it?
It really is telling. Let's take France. Their food inflation is running at about 3%, while their general inflation is around 2.5%, much lower than ours.
And why the difference?
Well, as we said, they're fully in the EU food system, fewer border issues. They also tend to have stronger agricultural subsidies and perhaps rely a bit more on local produce for certain things. Germany is similar, food inflation around 2.5%, general inflation 2.4%. Again, more domestic farming capacity, less reliance on imports compared to the UK.
Okay, so France and Germany looking quite different. And the UK?
The UK, food inflation, as we know, 7 to 9%. But general inflation down around 2.6%. And the reasons are that combination we've unpacked. The Brexit barriers adding cost, the heavy import dependence, the weaker pound effect. It's a unique mix hitting food particularly hard here.
And what about across the pond, the US?
In the USA, food inflation is around 2.2%, general inflation 2.6%, pretty closely aligned. They have a massive domestic agricultural base, the dollar has been relatively strong, and while they have internal transport costs, much of their food doesn't cross international borders in the same way ours does.
So when you look at it like that, the key differentiators really seem to be policy choices, geography, and how much food independence a country has.
Exactly. Those factors really explain why the UK is experiencing such persistently high food inflation compared to its peers right now.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together then.
Yeah.
Our mission for this deep dive was to understand why UK food prices are so high. And the central point seems crystal clear. We import a lot of our food, nearly half. And those imports have become significantly more expensive and much more complicated to bring in, largely due to the new realities post-Brexit. It's created a very distinct challenge for the UK.
That's the core of it. Food has become this special case of inflation here. It's uniquely exposed to that mix of global climate shocks, conflicts like Ukraine, specific UK border policies, and those underlying supply chain weaknesses.
And it's not just numbers on a spreadsheet, is it? Average households are genuinely struggling to cope. And it's hitting lower-income families the absolute hardest.
Without a doubt, the impact is real and deeply felt.
Which means the real long-term solutions. They aren't going to be quick fixes, are they? It sounds like they'll take years, require serious political commitment, focusing on boosting local farming, sorting out those trade deals, making the UK less vulnerable to these global shocks.
That seems to be the path forward, yes. Significant long-term strategic shifts are needed.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Given how structural these problems seem to be, the import reliance, the global uncertainties, what does true food security actually look like for an island nation that imports almost half of what it eats?
That's the big question, isn't it? And maybe alongside that, how much control do any of us, individually or even collectively, truly have over the cost of our daily bread in such a complex, interconnected world? Something to think about.
Thanks for watching the video.
We'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share them in the comments below. If there's a specific topic you'd like us to cover next time, do let us know.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. And if you found this one helpful, make sure to share it with others too.
See you in the next video.